It's being more frowned upon, but there are 3 million infants and children being cut a year still. The sad part of what we do is that a lot of these victims don't know that the surgery is even available, and certainly don't know that we're here and doing it at no charge.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 104 of the Andrew Deitch podcast. Hey, if this is your first time listening to the podcast, number one, thank you so much for checking this show out. It really means so much to me that my voice is coming through your eardrums. I'm actually recording this in my brand new, just finally finished podcast studio. I'm putting the finishing touches on it tomorrow, so I'm super, super pumped about that. But if you don't already know, this show is all about having meaningful in-person conversations with the most fascinating people that I know. That's one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to have this studio, so I could have a permanent place where I can sit down with people in person always. I've recorded in over 70 locations over the past year and a half or so, and so I'm really, really stoked that now I kind of have my own place to do this in more consistently. And anyways, before I jump into the show, I wanted to mention that this episode has been brought to you by the Andrew Deitch Podcast Internship Program. And the podcast is really, really growing, like I just mentioned, so we are hiring some interns. And basically, you're not going to be treated as like a coffee runner or just some busy worker. We're looking for people with an entrepreneurial spirit, a passion for learning, an open mind, and a solid understanding of podcast and social media culture. So if anyone you know is looking for opportunities in video production, audio editing, graphic design, animation, photography, social media strategy, public relations, podcast scheduling, prep, research, script writing, or copywriting, then please visit andrewdeitch.com/internships for more details and to apply. All right. So my guest today is Dr. Wayne Bloodworth. And Dr. Bloodworth is the founder and chairman of the Surgery Center for Female Genital Mutilation. And you're not alone if you've never heard of the phrase female genital mutilation. And we're going to refer to it as FGM a lot in this podcast. But just because you've never heard of it doesn't mean that it isn't one of the most prevalent, emotionally and physically demeaning evils that is present in the world today. And about 30 million women and children around the world are at risk in the next 10 years of falling victim to this practice. And Dr. Bloodworth actually has more than 35 years of surgical experience, and he's one of the only doctors in the world who's performing this life-changing surgery for these victims. And that's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to do this episode in the first place, because to be honest, it's a little bit out of my comfort zone, you know? Talking about female genital mutilation isn't my typical subject matter, but I think it's a really important topic to raise awareness for, and hopefully this conversation will raise awareness for this epidemic that you've probably never even heard of, and hopefully that just this conversation can help one person that can end up going to Dr. Bloodworth or finding help or seeking help or however this helps somebody. If we can just, raise awareness, help people, that's what I want to get out of this. So without any further ado, please welcome Dr. Wayne Bloodworth. All right, Dr. Bloodworth, we are live.
Good. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Well, I pretty much just told you how I got in touch with you. One of your, he's an intern, Austin?
He's a volunteer for us.
Gotcha, very cool. Well, one of the volunteers reached out, and it was a very intriguing email that I just read and it's pretty fascinating to me what you do. So I, of course, wanted to jump at the opportunity to talk with you and chat with you for a little bit. But like I kind of mentioned earlier, when I first like to introduce people, I think of it like an elevator pitch. If I was in an elevator with you and someone says, "Hey, so what do you do?" Like, what's the common response? Because obviously, it's not an easy question.
No, and we get that a lot. But right now, we have a nonprofit surgical center, actually the first in the U.S. for victims of female genital mutilation, and we do reconstructive surgery on those patients at no cost.
Wow. So obviously if someone gets that response on an elevator, they're probably like, whoa, that was a little more than I little more than I bargained for, I guess, a little bit, because I'm sure any times that you mention, even just genitals in public, like people are whoa, I don't know if I want to be talking about this on, right now.
Exactly. It usually clears the elevator pretty quick. But
that's my floor. I gotta go.
The common question that we get after that is, what is female genital mutilation? Because a lot of people have never heard of it or been acquainted with it. And it's basically those patients or victims that have lived in primarily sub-Saharan Africa. There are some in the Middle East and Asia, but it's predominantly in the sub-Saharan area of Africa, where it's a rite of passage or a situation that's not related to religion. A lot of people think it is because it occurs in predominantly Muslim countries, but it's just basically something that has gone on there. And I was looking at this yesterday. The origin of it goes back to roughly 5,000 years ago. They have found Egyptian mummies that were mutilated.
Wow.
So we know the practice has gone on for centuries.
Wow.
And so it's just that practice continues. It does seem to be on the decline, because a lot of advocacy groups have gone there and have gotten some laws changed, and they're educating people, and seems that it's coming along. But the statistics associated with it are still heartbreaking.
Yeah, I mean, because obviously it's something that's very, like you said, stigmatized, and people don't want to talk about it in public and everything. But of course, that just makes it so that victims of this, they don't want to come forward, they don't want to deal with it, they just kind of hide it away and keep it a secret.
Absolutely. They, in fact, some of them won't even talk to their siblings about it. We've had several patients that'll say, I don't know if my sister had this or not, but they don't talk about it.
Yeah, because it's, and we can get into that in a little bit, but I wanted to get into your story a little bit too, because obviously it's not the most common career path for a young man to go down. You're 18 or whatever. What do you want to do when you grow up? Oh, I want to be a surgeon for female genital mutilation. It's not the most common thing. So how did the younger version of before the doctor, I'm assuming, obviously you weren't born a doctor, Wayne Bloodworth, how did you become who you are today?
Well, I did my surgical training at Tulane University in New Orleans at Charity Hospital, and subsequently I practiced in doing nothing but gynecologic surgery, and had done that for 30 plus years, and was looking to slow down. And during that time I had done a good bit of charity work along the way, and had gone to other countries and practiced. But when I started looking to slow down, I envisioned myself going to foreign countries to do charity work. And then when I came upon the female genital mutilation, which is abbreviated FGM, I realized that, and actually with research, discovered that there are 500,000 victims of FGM or potential victims in the United States alone.
Wow.
So there's a huge population here. And then there are 200 million that have been cut worldwide.
Wow.
So I realized that I could probably have a greater impact if I did something here in the U.S., still be allowed to go to those other countries for 2 or 3 or 4 week missions, if you will, and but I could work every day here doing something that would have a greater impact on those victims in the U.S.
And you said that you were just a gynecological doctor before. Is that the correct gynecological?
Yeah, I was a gynecologist and I still am. But the last 10 years of my practice, I did cosmetic surgery, and so between the abilities that I have in cosmetic surgery and gynecology, it was a good fit to do reconstruction on these patients.
That makes sense. Yeah. So before you decided to become a doctor, what made you even want to go down the route of medicine anyways? Like, what was the...
Well, that's quite a long story for me, but I went through pharmacy school at the University of Georgia, so I was a pharmacist before I even went to medical school.
Gotcha.
And had a drugstore and that whole route. So I was 2 or 3 years, 4 years older than the average medical student when I was there. And then, but I had a real desire to be a physician from the time I was in high school. And we had a family friend that was a physician who encouraged me greatly. And so it was just something that I wanted to do, and I wouldn't change that choice for anything. It's been a wonderful life for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, and obviously, most people that go into the medical field, it's because they want to help people, of course. It's obviously being a doctor. A lot of times people, especially parents, they want their kids to be a doctor or whatever because, of course, it's a well-respected and well-paying job. But, of course, you also get the reward of being able to help people. And it seems like that's kind of your main mission because, you've talked a lot about wanting to go overseas and helping people and make an impact. And I mean, obviously, I think that's really important because I think some people in our society now, they kind of view doctors as, money hungry, big pharma kind of,
Right.
There may not necessarily be in your best interest. They're just trying to make money off of selling you medicines or whatever, all that,
Right.
all that kind of stuff. So it's really, really comforting to, hear from somebody that, wants to help people, which is great.
I've been fortunate all my life. The practice has been good to me throughout the years, and some of the most rewarding times that I've had in medicine have been with charity patients, and these are no different. In fact, these are probably more rewarding than any I've come upon because of their story. The stories that they bring to the center here are just they'll tear your heart out.
Yeah.
So you feel like, and in fact, we've had some that we operated on, I don't know, 3-4 months ago that they all become friends once they leave here, and they stay in touch with the ladies here in the office, and they'll call back and tell us this and that. But the recent one that really made my weekend was she called on a Friday and told her she was just over the moon with excitement and told our lady here that she had just gone to her routine gynecologist, and it was the first time in her life that she'd ever been told that she was normal.
Wow.
That's huge. I mean, to go through your life, this lady is 38 years old, to be, looked at that you're abnormal because you were mutilated, and to go back and them say, well, no, you're normal now. That made me feel good, and the entire staff was happy about it.
Yeah, that's really awesome.
Yeah.
That's kind of what keeps you going, stories like that.
It absolutely is.
That's great.
Yeah.
So you said kind of when you were a gynecologist, you started to learn about female genital mutilation and all that. So kind of for people that are listening that aren't really well versed in it, kind of maybe if you can explain the reasons why it happens, and you even said it mostly happens overseas, but it's also happening here. So kind of maybe educate everybody on what kind of the situation is with it.
Well, as I said, it's predominantly in sub-Saharan Africa. There's around the Horn of Africa in particular, there around Sudan, Somalia, Egypt, that area, there's 80 to 90% of the female population have had female cutting or mutilation. And so it's again just that heritage there that it's part of a young lady becoming a woman, and it's not even a young lady. They do it with children as well.
So it's like a ritual that they do later on. It's not like circumcision where it happens like at the time of birth.
They do it from infancy up to 12, 14 years old.
Wow.
I think the average I've read is around 9.
Wow.
But no, there's 25% of them statistically occurs between birth and age 3. So
it's a little more comforting, at least, because at least at that age you're not like remembering that incident. But I've recently it's come to my attention even the issue of and we can talk about this later, but the fact of circumcision being kind of a antiquated decision for parents to make as well. And can babies, they a long time ago they thought the babies couldn't even feel pain, so it wasn't unethical. And now that there's lots of studies been coming out about can babies can they hold on to that trauma and how it affects them later on in life, not just with their sexual partners or whatever, but also just mentally and everything. It can really just mess with you. And you even said a lot of these victims won't even talk to their siblings about it. Is it normally shame that keeps people from talking about it, or?
I don't really know the emotion that causes it. To your point about the circumcision, though, a large ethical question in that has been that these patients that are being circumcised or mutilated, you're doing it without their consent.
Exactly.
And they're a minor, and you're doing it without their consent. And
exactly.
so it's really being hotly debated. I was at a meeting in Montreal first part of this year, and it was a 3-day meeting, and I would guess half that meeting was about the ethics of this.
It's pretty fascinating because, like you said, it's all about the consent, and in the maybe back in the day it was thought of to be more ethical or whatever, but I think in the 21st century it just doesn't really necessarily have a place. We're a little more modern of a society.
It's really being questioned. There's no doubt, and there's religious aspects to it as well.
Definitely.
So it is being questioned. I don't think there's any real sense of right or wrong, best or worst case scenarios now, but it's being looked at.
Definitely. So, but let's go back to female genital mutilation. So with circumcision, there's kind of been reasons that are debated. With female genital mutilation, what is the reasoning? Like, why are they mutilating them, and what is that? What's happening there? Like,
the thought process is that it will keep them virginal and more desirable for a husband, and it will help restore or maintain honor for the family. So it's and when it comes time for this person to be married, they have more, quote, value, unquote, than one that has not been cut. And so they, even with trading, when a mutilated female is sold, and they are frequently sold, they will bring more on that market than if they had not been cut.
And so the process of the mutilation, it's not only like a physical thing, but it's also like a symbolic thing, kind of? Or
it's symbolic to the future husband that this person is virginal, and there are even stories of victims that have been mutilated, especially with one particular type where the vulva is sewn together, that on the wedding night a ceremonial knife is used to defibrillate, and then the following day they're being refibrillated. So, I mean, the horrors of it are just unimaginable.
What's so I get on the wedding day that they would, cut it open, but what would be the purpose of sewing it back up?
To maintain the virtue of the woman. Keep her faithful to the husband.
Wow.
It's control. It's all about female control.
In these societies that happens, is circumcision a thing, or is it mainly that they're doing this mutilation to only female babies and children?
Are you talking about male circumcision?
Yeah, with male circumcision.
That's just a mixed bag. Some places they do, some places they don't, but it's not related to anything with the females.
Because at least in the culture that I was raised up in, it's very common for male circumcision, but I'd never even heard of any sort of female genital circumcision or mutilation at birth or anything, because it's
right.
There didn't seem to be any health reasons. Like there are none. And there are no health reasons. It's all for societal and symbolic reasons.
Correct.
Pretty much, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
And not only is it mutilating them where they're removing parts of the skin, right, but also it's removing the function too in a lot of cases.
Correct.
As well, right?
Correct.
So as this person grows up, you mentioned that there's 500,000 in the United States.
Correct.
So how is that happening? Is that these women are being brought over after being raised in these societies, or how is that occurring?
It's primarily through immigration that these patients and some refugees that are here, but that's these are the families that we're encountering it in, of the immigrants here. There is a thing now called vacation cutting, where the immigrants that have come here with an uncut child will take them back to the home country to have them mutilated and then bring them back in. And the U.S. passed a federal law against that, I think, in 2013. And now, actually, ICE is doing screenings for this down and it was on 4 East Coast airports, Atlanta being one of them, where if they think that a child is coming back after this vacation cutting, then they will open a case on it.
Wow. And obviously that's something that's really hard to monitor because you can't just, in the airport, like start inspecting people's genitals, you know, obviously that's a huge breach of security and,
Sure.
You just can't be doing that. So how would they be monitoring that? Like,
I think they're screening them because they know the countries that have the high incidence of it. And if a family comes back with a child of a certain age from one of those countries that's been gone a short period of time or whatever, they've got their criteria that screens them. And then if they talk to them and they feel like it's a suspicious situation, then they will ultimately open an investigation on it.
Gotcha. So with these women that have come as immigrants back from their country and that are typically your patients, what is kind of the typical situation when they end up coming to you? Like, what is the final straw, or what's the situation that they end up coming to you?
The typical patient that we have presents after a number of years of being mutilated. We have very few that come in, certainly none that are under 18, but those that come in have probably been mutilated for 10 to 20 years, and most of them aren't sexually functional, and they've either met someone or they're tired of being alone or isolated, as a lot of them are, and so they come to have the reconstruction done, and they will give stories that are unbelievable as to how it happened, how they got here, things they've been exposed to. You could write books about it.
Yeah, I'm sure, because obviously those situations are super traumatic, and anytime that you're dealing with your genitals, it's something that's a very sensitive subject for anybody, and if you're looked at as like abnormal or whatever, that can be pretty traumatizing to even any sort of sexual encounter is going to be a sort of meaningful reason for that, and if you're constantly associating that with fear or shame or whatever, it's got to be really, really challenging and really
and avoiding those incidents.
Yeah,
they will totally avoid them. And I do have some husbands that have made appointments for their wives.
Wow.
That have said, hey, they were mutilated at a certain point and they need help. Can you help them? So you said that you kind of found out about this during your time as a gynecologist, and then you went overseas. Is that what your first experience with female genital mutilation was, or what was your... No, I had gone to some meetings where I had intentionally gone to learn more about FGM, and then the pioneer of this reconstruction procedure is in Paris, Dr. Pierre Foldes. And so I've been over twice and trained with him to learn this particular operation. And the sad part of what we do is that a lot of these victims don't know that this surgery is even available, and certainly don't know that we're here and doing it at no charge. So we're making every effort to get that word out to these communities, and we're hoping that we can see these patients and do them some good.
So in that process, if there's been anytime that there's like skin removed or something like that, what type of procedure is used to reconstruct it? Like, what is actually happening? Because this guy in Paris was the first of his kind to do something like this, right?
Yes, the big thing that Dr. Foldes did was a reconstruction of the clitoris, which in the vast majority of these mutilations is removed. It's excised, and so at that point, most everyone thought that there was nothing else that could be done.
Yeah.
But Pierre found a way that he could isolate the scarred portion of the clitoris, free it up, mobilize it, and externalize it to a point that it can be functional again.
Wow.
And so it restores their function and their identity. And and then the other portions, the vulva and all, from my cosmetic surgery experiences, then we can deal with that with any number of issues.
Wow. And so is the most common form of FGM when they remove the clitoris?
Gotcha. It is.
Wow. Yeah. So that's fascinating, because obviously, you think you lose an arm or something, you're like, well, I can't just grow back my arm, or
right.
I lose my thumb or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's really fascinating. So like you said, a lot of times the hardest part is getting the word out that this is even available, and hopefully this podcast can really help with that.
Sure.
Maybe it'll reach someone who knows someone who's been affected by it, or someone who has been affected by it.
Sure.
But what has been, I guess the most effective thing in getting the word out about this? Like, what has been the best ways?
Most of the patients now find us on the internet. Mm-hmm. We have a website, mm-hmm. and it's got some history of the FGM situation, plus my history and instructions as how to find us. And then when they call here, we walk them through any number of things to get them here. And we're seeing patients from California. I saw one from Nigeria. We operated on a Nigerian who flew here from Nigeria to have the surgery, and she found us on the internet.
Wow.
So the vast majority of the patients that we see are not local patients. They're from all over the world.
Wow. And how do you guys stay profitable when, like you said, all of these operations, you can offer it for free for these people? Well,
we obviously accept and welcome donations, and we're looking now to try to get some grants done, but to date it's just been through donations.
Wow. That's really cool, because obviously anyone who's experiencing some sort, they think, well, I obviously need some sort of reconstructive surgery, and that's not going to be cheap. That's probably the biggest factor in why they haven't even started seeking out help or anything like that, right?
Well, I think they honestly don't know that the procedure is available. I think they just have lived with it for a certain period of time, and they've grown accustomed to it and basically given up. And if they could be informed that this is available, I think that a number of them, and a lot of them have come forward, but the vast majority of them that are still out there just don't know it's available.
And you said that you have gone over and done some kind of trips to other countries and things like that. What can you tell me about those trips?
I haven't gone to any of these countries that do this.
Gotcha.
We're in the works with that. We're talking with several hospitals in Africa now, but we have not had time to go.
Gotcha.
This is the surgery center for FGM, and we have started this in April of this year. So we're still new in what we're doing, and so we're trying to get the surgeries done that are patients that are coming in now, and then at the same time working to try to create relationships with hospitals, and primarily in Africa. There's one in Nigeria. There's talking to people in Rwanda and other countries that have a high incidence of this.
Is there any sort of propaganda against this in these countries now? Like, is it still pretty much the norm, or is it it's being frowned upon a little more now?
It's being more frowned upon, but it's there. To give you another statistic, there are 3 million infants and children being cut a year still.
Wow.
And but that has fallen from highs of 5 and 6 million a year, so they're making progress with it. There are educational programs, a lot of activists over there doing this. Laws have been passed in a lot of these countries. I think there are 28 countries that do this in Africa, and 22 of them have passed laws against it. But of course, to enforce these laws in the areas where they are and with the resources they have, it's pretty slim.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like, changing a culture, changing the perspectives of people that live in these countries is a lot harder than just, explaining that there's no, medical reasoning for it. Because obviously they probably know that,
Sure.
They want the control. Like you said, it's all about control. And that's one thing that I wanted to promote with my podcast and stuff, is to share a different perspective with people. And some cultures, like, they do things differently, and we might look at it as wrong, but it might not necessarily be wrong. And then there are some things in other cultures that they do that we look at as wrong, and it is wrong. And that's one thing that's kind of hard to tell somebody that like, hey, what you've been doing and what your culture's been doing, what your dad did to you, and what what you're gonna do to your kids is against just human ethics. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And I think when it's so ingrained in what happens, and maybe it's even a ritualistic thing of becoming a woman or whatever it is, it's hard to kind of get people to change their ways, because it's like it's always been this way. My dad did it to my, it's been going on for generations and generations, and I don't see why I need to be the person to stop it.
It's been thousands of years.
Yeah.
And I was reading something yesterday that it was felt like that it began on the west coast of the Red Sea, and then drifted, from Egypt there down south into the Horn of Africa and then westward, and was associated a lot with routes of slave trade. And then these people would take these young girls that would be sold as slaves, and that they would be more valuable again if they were found to be virginal, and so they used that as another reason for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and is there, you said it's not always religious, but is there any religious connotation? It's
No.
Really just cultural?
It's just cultural. I do think that there's a tacit agreement with some of the religious sorts that allow it. I don't think they promote it as a religious thing, but I do think it's a wink and nod situation with a lot of them. But there is a higher percentage of different religions, not necessarily Islam, that also has this occur. So it's not isolated just to that religion, but it's in those countries where that religion is predominant.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I did want to, we talked about it a little bit before, like the male circumcision issue. I did want to talk about it because I think it is an issue that's kind of coming up a lot, especially in the United States, is, especially guys, we don't tend to talk about that in public. Like,
Right.
We're not saying like, oh, are you,
Sure.
asking. So it's kind of like a similar situation where, sisters won't even talk to each other about it. But with guys, the issue has kind of come up. Is it moral, and can, a child consent? Because I think a lot of, especially in America, guys don't even realize that there was, this functional piece of skin that was on you when you were a child, and then it was removed. And as far as if it's right or wrong or whatever, I think the main thing, like you said, it kind of boils down to consent. Like, we should be...
Absolutely.
Yeah, and whether we're doing some sort of, it is an operation, it's a permanent removal of something.
Sure.
I think we should probably be, again, in a modern society, we should be kind of leaving that alone, leaving it to the wayside, and letting children grow up and consent to that if they wish or whatever.
The argument against that, just to give you the other side, is if a child has a deformity, they still aren't of majority so that they could give their consent, and the parents then assume responsibility for making that decision. So the question is, there was something wrong, but was it to the point that you had to make the decision, or could the child have made it later? So there's the argument you hear on both sides, and there's not an easy answer to it.
No, there's definitely not. And I think that's one of the things that I like to talk about on my show, is like the issues that are not necessarily black and white.
Correct.
The issues that they do have a fuzzy gray area. It comes up in the abortion debate. It comes up in the racism debate.
Sure.
It comes up in all kinds of issues that are extremely prevalent in our world right now. But yeah, I actually posted something on Facebook like earlier this year about it. It was an ad campaign. I think it was in London or something, and it said circumcision is male, it said something about circumcision is male genital mutilation or something. And I mainly just wanted to see what people's thoughts were and provoke thoughts about it. And it was really fascinating to hear even just the women coming out, because a lot of times the females in the situation are the ones on the you could say not in a, this is a bad way of saying it, but on the receiving end of the situation, and they're like, oh, I don't want my kid to have I even saw this, like, oh, I don't want my kid to have a turtleneck or whatever. Like, they had all these weird things, but I was thinking about, what if that script was flipped? What if we were talking about female genital mutilation and it was just a purely cosmetic thing? Oh, I don't want I don't want his penis to look like that. If we flipped the script and said, oh, I don't want my daughter to have, loose skin hanging off down there. I want it to be cleaned up and cut off or whatever. We would be appalled. I think
Sure.
that it would be, especially with our society right now, we'd be extremely appalled. Like, especially if there's no health benefits to it.
Right.
And you could argue that well, we're going to cut your finger off because your finger could eventually become infected or something
Right.
like that. It's like, we're going to cut your foreskin off because it could become infected.
Yeah.
And it's like, well,
Where does it end?
where does it exactly? And that's where that fuzzy gray line falls. And I just thought it was fascinating, to see women commenting on the issue from a cosmetic standpoint. And I was thinking about it. I was like, what if it's gross. Like, think about if the script was flipped, how evil it would seem for you to make those types of comments.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The other part of this that we don't always think about, but I see a lot of, are the psychological aspects of it. Most of these patients are suffering from PTSD or depression or both. And when they come in, they frequently can't even make eye contact with me.
Wow.
And when I start to examine them, they'll recoil. And if you bring up initially where this insult occurred, they will tear up, and you can tell that they withdraw.
I'm
And
sure.
so it takes, and we offer counseling here with psychologists and psychiatrists to treat that.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that in the short time that these patients are here, which may be 10 days to 2 weeks, you can see a turnaround just in that short of time, because they will open up, they will tell you their story, they will, and when they leave, there's no more happy patients and full of thank yous, and the gratitude that they show is, again, heartwarming. But you psychologically can observe that there's a change after they've had the surgery.
I'm sure. Yeah, because, you could argue that a lot of times what's the main reason why people end up wanting to, get married and, they want to have kids, they want to, be able to, have a sexual relationship with somebody, and if that is just like completely out of the question
Right.
or out of the picture or whatever, it can be really crippling. And
It changes their life.
yeah, exactly.
And they will tell you, you've given me back what someone took from me.
Wow.
And so, and you've restored a function that they haven't had.
So you said a lot of husbands will reach out to you as well. Is this I'm sure you get to talk with a lot of people. Is it something that typically, like, it's almost like a conversation that you'd have to have if you had to tell someone that you had an STD or something like that? Like, obviously, I want to be in a relationship with you, but I have this thing or whatever. Is it a lot of times? Does that end up having to? I mean, it must have to come up at some point before a relationship or whatever. But I'm sure some of these husbands are like, they're thinking, well, this can't be the end of the line. There's got to be some way that they can
Right.
help.
I mean, frequently, they have problems with intercourse. It's painful, and some of them recognize that the wife is suffering in this. Some husbands don't and don't care, but there are those who do. And then a good number of these patients simply aren't married. They just never got that far.
Yeah.
But it's a situation that is hard for a patient to address with a loved one.
Yeah, definitely. And you said a lot of these women are, it's very psychological. I'm sure that they have a lot of resentment towards their parents or whoever.
That's an odd story. You don't find that.
Huh.
It's they will typically say, and that's not in every case, but they will typically say that they understand that it was a traditional thing and that they were a part of it. And oddly enough, it's the mothers who usually take these children to be mutilated.
Really?
Yeah, it's not the fathers. And it's quite a story. They We'll tell them that tomorrow's going to be a special day. We're going to have candy. We're going to put on your cute little dress. And they'll take them into some obscure area, into another hut or the bush. And then they will be met by more adults. And these adults will hold them down by each limb. And they'll be restrained. And typically one will sit on the chest, put a hand over the mouth of the young girl. And then the cutter, who is sometimes a midwife in that village or just an older person, will take a rusty razor blade or scissors or even a top of a tin can and mutilate the child.
Wow.
It's totally unsterile, and there are a number of these kids that die.
I'm sure.
They bleed to death, they have severe infections, and they die.
It's crazy.
It's pitiful.
Yeah. And it's all in the name of tradition, really.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So a lot of times these victims, they don't really resent their parents. It's just something that, because probably if their parents didn't go along with it, the other people in the village would question it, or
I suppose. But and of course I'm dealing with adults now who have had time to forgive and forget.
Yeah.
But they understand where they came from. There are some that will have resentment. But a lot of them don't. And there are a number of patients that aren't my patient, but victims of this, that will say, I don't want to be operated on. I'm fine. I'll stay the way I am.
Huh.
So even knowing that this surgery is available, they may choose to not do it because that's part of their culture that they want to hold on to. It's a deep held belief.
Yeah. It's definitely it's hard because you can't, on one hand you want to it comes up a lot in debate now with cultural appropriation, or
correct,
who am I to tell you what your culture should or shouldn't believe, almost like freedom of religion or freedom of speech. But once you're dealing with a human right, or a human it's almost kind of like war crimes or something. It's just that it's war, but there's still war crimes. There's just some things that aren't done, even in times of, in the worst times, we still have to hold on to some sort of ethical high ground that we all kind of agree upon, because otherwise, everything just kind of falls apart.
This is sometimes viewed as just an invasion of Western values on these patients, on these peoples. And there's a resistance to that. There was an episode on one of the TV shows recently that they featured FGM, which is the first time I've ever seen that.
Wow.
It wasn't very accurately portrayed, sadly, but at least brought it to the fore enough that perhaps some of the people in the U.S. that know that it's out there know that, because they did do a surgery on there. So maybe it will have them ask a few questions and hopefully give us a call.
Is there anyone else in the United States that's doing these surgeries, or is it just you guys?
It's pretty much us.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, people are flying in from all around to have this done. That's really amazing.
Yeah.
And also the doctor in Paris, you said, is also doing...
There's a doctor in Pierre is doing it in Paris. There's also one guy that he trained that's in Spain, and there's another physician that I know that's in Cairo, Egypt, that does them. But those were the ones that were trained by Pierre that are actually his disciples, if you will.
Yeah.
There have been some people that have tried to do a procedure, and I've read about it. It's in very low numbers, but it's not anything that would restore the function to the point. Pierre's done over 6,000 of these procedures.
Wow.
So we know that his statistics are good. I've been there. I've seen the results in post-op patients. So it's not something that's just a scam. It's the real deal, the procedure is.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What can, a normal, because this is something I thought about before even this podcast. I'm like, okay, there's two guys here talking about, female genitals and the rights of a woman and stuff. It's not a common conversation.
Right.
But it's great that we're even having this conversation, because on the one hand, it's kind of like, it's kind of like what's coming up in a lot of conversations, like, well, you can't talk about that because you're a man, or you can't talk about that because you're white, or whatever. And, I think that even any kind of conversation around it is just going to bring it to the forefront, and having conversations and, meaningful conversation and productive conversation is, what we need to be trying to engage in. But what can a normal person, out there that, what can we do to kind of bring more attention to this subject and to try to
I think if
normalize it?
If you're speaking with anyone that may have been mutilated or has contact with a possible person that's been mutilated, is to make them aware that there's a procedure that can change that. And it's a day surgery. They come in and have it and go home that night.
Wow.
And we do them right here in the surgery center. And of course, it's no cost to them. So it's not like it's more the decision, do you want surgery or not? There's no other considerations. And so if there's anybody that's listening that can talk to a personal possible victim of this, that's the advice to give them. There are things that can be done to help you.
And as far as kind of the other point that I was kind of mentioning at the beginning, like two guys that are just kind of having this conversation, I'm sure that you've gotten that in the past, like, isn't it weird that you're a man and this is your...
I'm an older man, so it makes a big difference to me. But I've dealt with female patients all my life. I've got a wife, I've got 2 daughters, and I've got a granddaughter. So I cannot imagine this having been put upon one of my family members. It's something I couldn't live with. And when I hear the stories of these patients and what they go through, I don't think anybody with disregarding race, age, ethnicity, religion, whatever, there's no way that you can justify doing this to a child. It's just, it's here in the States, we're passing laws against it. And there's 26 states or 27 now that have passed laws, and there's federal laws against it. But in those states even that don't have laws against it, I'm sure it would be considered child abuse in some form. So it's a serious situation. I don't see how anybody could do that to a child. I just can't wrap my head around that. And I guess I'm a little more passionate about it because I do have these daughters and granddaughters that I love. But even as a physician, if I had a room full of sons, I'd feel the same way. It's just a horrible practice.
Yeah, and I think that anyone who would make a comment like that is pretty closed-minded or pretty,
Sure.
ignorant of what's going on.
I respect their heritage and their traditions, but still not to the point of disfiguring and mutilating a child. That's where it crosses a line at that point.
Yeah, because there's a difference between trying to be politically correct and having this political correctness and respecting other people's beliefs and cultures and religions, and having a boundary as far as I can respect you up to this point.
That's right.
Because I think at the end of the day, that's one thing that I think about a lot, and maybe it's something that other people think about too, is what is normal? What is, why is this how it is? For example, it's customary for, some people to, at the dinner table, to have their hands in their lap because it shows respect or whatever. Maybe in other cultures it's disrespectful to have your hands in your lap because you might have a weapon in your lap or whatever, and you have them on the table. And to someone, there, you're like, why is that guy being so disrespectful? He's got his hands in his lap or whatever. Why is that guy being so disrespectful? And those types of differences, that's just kind of an interesting conversation. But when you're talking about, permanently, mutilating someone or whatever, that's not an issue of, well, that's just their culture. That's really... something that we all need to, hopefully we can raise awareness and begin to stop it.
I really hope that we can. There are goals set that hopefully this would be eradicated by the year 2013.
Wow.
But, that's only 12 years. This has gone on for thousands of years, and they're still doing 3 million a year. So that's
2030 you meant?
2030, I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry, I thought you said 2013. I was like,
no.
Oh, well, we missed that one.
No, 2030.
2030, gotcha.
And that's just really optimistic. I don't think we'll reach that goal. Obviously, we need to try. But and then there's others that say, let's try to eradicate it in a generation. Whenever. As soon as we can get it, the better.
Yeah.
But it's just it's leaving human lives tattered.
Yeah. Well, I think with the emergence of, in especially because a lot of this is happening in third world countries and things like that, where there's no, a lot of times these barbaric things are happening because there's just lack of information, there's lack of resources there, and with the internet, you can argue that it's, it's ruining our society and kids on social media, but, it really is empowering people, because if they have access to information that the rest of the world has at their fingertips, like, that's extremely powerful. And the more that, that's what, in communist, North Korea, for example, they don't allow their citizens to have access to the internet, because with information comes power. When the average citizen has the information of the whole world at their fingertips,
That's right.
That's really powerful. So I think, with the internet, with cell phones and technology becoming more prevalent and becoming more accessible, that's the cool thing about technology, that it's been so, over the past even 10, 20 years, it's multiplied hundredfold.
Sure.
So you can only imagine in one generation what can happen.
Exactly.
It is pretty
Well, I
amazing.
think it will be eradicated. I have no doubt about that. And there are a lot of activist groups that are working toward that, but we see very few medical groups that are working toward taking care of the patients that have already been mutilated. There's that huge population of that's out there, and very little is being done for them. And which frustrates me, because I encounter those patients. But I would like to see more be done. I hope that we can start training some OBGYN residents, family residents, pediatric residents, to be able to pick these kinds of things up when they see it in their office, realize what they're dealing with, and know how to deal with it. Because now it's not being done. It's not being taught.
Do you think that eventually this practice that you've learned from, you said Dr. Pierre was his name, in Paris, do you think that would eventually ever be something that would be taught in any sort of medical school?
Sure.
That's awesome.
It'll catch on, sure.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so do you think that's the future of what's going to happen eventually?
I think
You'll be able to go to your gynecologist and they'll be able to refer you to somebody that can...
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think it'll be... it will be a typical gynecologic procedure, probably paid for by insurance at some point, to restore this, and it should. It's a part of their life that they've lost, and it certainly deserves attention, and especially with insurance providers. So.
And you also said that there's like kind of especially within your patients, there's almost like a community of these survivors and these victims that have come through your office that have become friends and connect with each other and everything.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's going to grow even more too.
We hope so.
Yeah,
we
that's
hope
great.
So. They stay in touch, and even after she's returned to Nigeria, she's in touch. So
that's awesome.
That's as good as it gets.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you think that people should know about what's going on, or anything else that would be an interesting piece that maybe surprised you, or anything that people out there should know?
No, I can't think of anything that we haven't covered. I think that it's pretty obvious. It's a brutal situation. It's an atrocity, but hopefully we're making inroads in stopping it, and I know we're making inroads on those patients that we do see, because we're turning their lives around, and that's certainly rewarding to us, and I think it's been rewarding to them. I appreciate you giving us a chance to voice that. Yeah, that's important to us, is to get our message out, and hopefully we can see more and do more.
Definitely. Yeah, I think especially I told all my friends, I'm like, yeah, I'm doing a podcast with, and I tried to explain it real quickly, and he's like, how did that end up, like, how did you end up getting hooked up with them or whatever? But like I said, I saw that initial email from Austin, and I thought this is important stuff, and I'm no stranger to having, not, for lack of a better word, weird conversations with people. So I really appreciate you guys even reaching out to me, because it's such a cool opportunity to be able to hopefully advocate for stuff like this and get the awareness out there for people. So if people are wanting to get involved in some in this cause, in supporting and helping these victims, what's the best way that an average person can kind of get involved in that?
If they will use our website, it's the Surgery Center for FGM.org. We'll direct you here. We've got all the resources to teach, to have you volunteer, to have you contribute. Anything in that regard, it comes right through the website. It's got our directions to our office. It's got our phone number, and we'll be glad to help in any way we can.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Bloodworth, thank you so much for coming on the show. Glad we could make it happen, and we'll talk to you later, everybody.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you again to Dr. Bloodworth for sitting down with me to hopefully shed some light on this problem that's affecting so many people worldwide. And if you or anyone you know is dealing with FGM, then definitely get in touch with Dr. Bloodworth and his staff. They're awesome. So typically, this is the part of the show where I try to steer people in the direction of another episode that you probably would enjoy if you got value out of this episode. And since this episode was definitely very, very unique, didn't have like another podcast that was kind of so similar to it, but I think that you would probably enjoy going back to listen to episode 72 with my friend Rachel Woods. And Rachel's an aerial yoga instructor, and she's also a chiropractic assistant and a world traveler. And she has a really powerful story of overcoming some of the worst times in her life, including a death in her family, her ending up getting cancer, her being raped, and dealing with an eating disorder. And that episode was really intense, and the topics we discussed were really important to expose and talk about. And that's kind of the reason why I draw those conclusions with the podcast I just did with Dr. Bloodworth. Really important stuff. Sometimes not the most comfortable to talk about, but go check it out. Episode 72 with Rachel Woods. That episode is called Living Lotus. It's really good. Coming up next, we have episode 105 with the world-renowned DJ, Will Clark. And if you haven't heard of Will Clark, he's amazing. He's pretty huge. He's from England. He's actually signed to Claude Von Stroke's label called Dirty Bird. And Dirty Bird has like a really, really close following, really cult-like following. I'm going to be talking to him all about what it's like to be a world touring DJ, running his clothing company called Doing It for the Cuddles, and a chat about his podcast called The Barbershop. So I'm pretty stoked about it. We're going to be recording that in my brand new finished studio. It's going to be finished tomorrow. Basically, we're putting the finishing touches on some of the stuff. If you want to check out the updates, you can follow me on my Instagram and all that good stuff. I've been posting some cool updates and behind-the-scenes stuff. I keep saying stuff. But anyways, all that will be coming out on Monday. We're recording on Friday, so stay tuned. It'll be out on Monday. If you want to support the show, the best way to do that is to tell a friend, A lot of people are talking about podcasts these days, so if you enjoy this episode or if you just enjoy my podcast in general, I would really appreciate you sharing it with friends. Word of mouth is the biggest way that this podcast spreads. Also, if you feel like being awesome, go leave a 5-star review on iTunes. That really helps me out as well, too. If you want to follow me, you can go to my website, andrewdeitch.com. You can find all the links to all my social media handles and accounts. And I hope all of my American listeners have an amazing Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is tomorrow. So hopefully you get to spend some time with your family, eat some good food. And I will see you guys next week with DJ Will Clark. I'm sure anytime that you mention, even just genitals in public, like people are like, whoa. I don't know if I want to be talking about this on, right now.
Exactly. It usually clears the elevator pretty quick. But